that wrote the first folio that put it all together. So if you're interested, highly recommend Lauren Gunnarsson, The Book of Will.
Cool.
And going into the story, of, as we talked about in the first workshop, about the difference between the first folio and all other versions. Yay, fun to see some more faces on here. So it looks like Dana, you are recording right now. Awesome,
yeah.
Thank you.
I just got it's opening now with the plug for your friends.
Oh, perfect. Good job. Lauren Gunnarsson, we opened with you. Wonderful. So this is going to be a power hour of As You Like It. This was a fun challenge to put together to specifically look at one play. And at first I was like, what are we going to talk about for an hour? And now I'm like, I'm gonna have to talk at warp speed in order to try to get things in. So what I thought, the way that I want to kind of structure all of these, because I don't know about you guys, but I'm like needing structure during this time. So I like that it's every day or every Saturday at the same time. I'm going to start with I'm going to try to get these 5-minute overviews, because overviews, the plot for all the plays is the easiest thing to Google and to find. But I find it particularly interesting for this play. There's a lecture that an Oxford professor gives that I was listening to, and she starts it by saying, what happens in this play? And she gives some great information for 2 hours, and her conclusion is not much. So I mentioned in one of the previous workshops that, we love Shakespeare, not necessarily because of the plot of the what, but because of the language comes together and what he's saying. And this play in particular, I was just blown away by what he's actually doing with this play. So before we get into all of that, I'm going to just do a very, very quick 5 minutes. Somebody time me. I'm going to try to make it happen. Plot of As You Like It. Okay, we ready? Okay. We've got Orlando, who's the youngest son of Sir Roland. Oh, you know what? I'm going to pause because anybody who has their microphone on, if you don't mind. Okay, pausing. Okay, so here we are in the forest of Ardennes or Arden or Ardennes. We'll talk about what that means in France. We've got Orlando, the youngest son of Sir Roland de Boys. He's venting to his elderly servant Adam about how his older brother Oliver is just a shithead and taking his inheritance because he's the firstborn son and gets to do that. Oliver's servant is Dennis. They also have a brother, Jaques, which is not to be confused with the main Jaques, which we'll talk about later. And the main problem is we've got two dukes. We've got an usurping duke, Sir Frederick. He has a daughter, Celia. Celia has a servant, and Sir Frederick has a servant named Lebeau. Then we've got an exiled duke, and that's Duke Senior. And he has a daughter named Rosalind. And Rosalind and Celia are besties. And then we cut to a wrestling match, because why not, with Charles the wrestler, great name, with Orlando, that brother that we talked about, and who wants to get his street cred back. And in a stunning upset, Orlando beats Charles, locks eyes with Rosalind, they fall in love. Then Sir Frederick's servant LeBeau advises Orlando, you should probably leave, the Duke's pissed at you. And then the Duke exiles Rosalind because she's popular too, and he wants his daughter to be more popular. And Celia's like, no, that's my bestie. If she's going, I'm leaving too, but let's bring Touchstone, the fool, for entertainment. Celia's like, I've got a brilliant plan because this is going to be dangerous. I'm going to put dirt on my face and I'm going to look poor, and you can call me Aliena or Aliena, potatoes, potatoes. And Rosalind's like, hey, I'm tall. I'll be a boy. Call me Ganymede for reasons we'll talk about later. And then once we're in the forest, we meet Duke Senior, Rosalind's dad, and his fellow exiles, also AKA Robin Hood and the Merry Men, cooking their dinner. Orlando shows up with his old man Adam, who's starving, and Orlando threatens him with a knife to give him food. Duke Senior's like, whoa, no problem. Just take it. You don't have to threaten us. Orlando's like, I'm sorry. I'm normally a really nice guy. I'm just trying to help out this old man. And then Jaques, the main Jaques, gives all the world's a stage speech. Then we meet the trio, which is Rosalind now disguised as Ganymede, Celia disguised as Aliena, and Touchstone arrive into the forest, and they meet the country shepherd Corin, and they're like, hey, let's buy that cottage. And he's like, cool. And then we've got Silvius, who's a simple country boy who's in love with Phoebe, who falls in love with Ganymede because she thinks he's a boy, but it's really Rosalind. Then Ganymede, Rosalind, finds Orlando, and he's been busy writing terrible love poems and stuffing him into trees. And Ganymede's like, you know what? You're not very good at this whole wooing thing. I'll be your tutor. And hey, why not call me Rosalind? And I'll tell you why you've got no game and what to do instead. Then comes Oliver, that jerk older brother from the beginning, who's been sent to the forest by his baddie father, and he's attacked by, wait for it, forest lion. And but Orlando saved him, and so then Orlando sees Celia and Ganymede. He falls instantly with Celia. Celia's like, feelings mutual, and he's like, yo, he recognizes Rosalind, which we'll discuss how we know that. And he's like, sorry, you know, Orlando's healing from his lion wound. Then Ganymede and Orlando reunite. It reaches a tipping point, and she's also had it with Phoebe, who's fallen in love with her, and she's like, okay, here's the deal. I have a plan that's gonna make everyone happy. Just meet me the next day. The next day, she reveals herself. She's a woman. All the couples get together. Also, there's Audrey, who didn't make it into the plot thus far, but her and Touchstone, the fool, end up together. So that's 4 couples. And a messenger rolls up to say, hey, that evil Duke Frederick has found religion, given the dukedom back to Duke Senior, and they can all return home. But Jacques the melancholy, all the world's a stage guy, decides to go be with Frederick. Also, the god Hymen makes an entrance, and that is As You Like It. So that, thank you.
4 minutes. 4 minutes.
4 minutes, okay. I apologize if that was your first ever introduction to As You Like It, but I didn't want to go on too long about the plot because, like I said, it's sort of the least important thing that happens in the play. Thank you. Thank you, actually, also, is that Amanda? Amanda is the reason why we're doing As You Like It. She reached out to me at the very beginning and said, hey, I'm interested in doing this, playing Phoebe. Would you be interested in Rosalind? And I was like, sure. But inside, I was like, I don't really love that play. And I'm so glad that you did, because now I love it. So the subtitle for this is, I'm calling it Lions, Pancakes, and Hymen, Oh My. It seems apropos. We're going to get into why. Somebody's chewing something that sounds amazing, but we might want to mute, if you don't mind. Thank you so much. Okay. So I've mentioned, you know, in this play, as you can probably tell from the overview, it's not the most amazing plot. In fact, the William Hazlitt, who was a critic of Shakespeare at the time, like not like critical, but a critic, you know, he said, it's not what is done, but what is said. In many ways, As You Like It is really a love letter to language. Probably Love's Labour's Lost is the most, would be first place for that, but this would be second, I'd say, a good runner-up. And what I think is what really turned this play around for me from being like, oh, I think it's kind of a second-rate Twelfth Night, to being like, this is amazing, is when I looked more at why it was written. So Shakespeare wrote this most likely in 1599, which was like banner year for Shakespeare. This was when he wrote Henry V, Julius Caesar, probably the first draft of Hamlet. So like, you know, all in all, not a bad year for Shakespeare. It was the same year that the Globe Theatre was built. And a fun fact, so this would have been possibly the first play that was performed in there. In the Globe Theatre has a motto, which I don't know the Latin for, I won't even attempt, but it translates to "the world is a playhouse," which is really fun when you think about this is the play that all the world's a stage comes from. It's probably not an accident. This was likely performed on what was called Shrove Tuesday, but not in the theater, but like kind of privately for Queen Elizabeth and her court. So Shrove Tuesday is what we think of now as Fat Tuesday, the day before Mardi Gras. But back then it was called, it was known as Pancake Day, because tradition was that you would eat pancakes filled with beef and spiced with mustard. And I mentioned this, and I'm gonna see, actually, I've never tried sharing a screen before, but I'm gonna try to get, you know, really fancy here. How do I, share screen. Fabulous. Okay, and I'm going to show you this. So if you do view, you can't see the fancy view version, but can you see right now what it says, this quote? Okay, great. So this is Touchstone. He says, of a certain knight that swore by his honor they were good pancakes, and swore by his honor the mustard was not. Now I'll stand to it, the pancakes were not, and the mustard was good, and yet was not the knight forsworn. So modern audiences would have no idea what this is talking about, but so poor Touchstones for like 400 years now have had to try to deliver this joke with no reference. It's basically like a Thanksgiving turkey and gravy joke that none of us would understand. But I like it because it sort of nestles into what was happening again at the time when this might have been performed. And Shakespeare does this so many times throughout this play, where these really, really clever references, we just wouldn't necessarily know them. But once we find them, then it's up to us as actors or the directors, whatever, to make these really interesting choices. So it was likely performed the night before the theater opened, so that, you know, it goes well for Queen Elizabeth, which is great. And then the next day, Shakespeare and his like 4 other merry men that are the collaborators signed a lease on the Globe. So it's just like a fun time. It was a fun time for the theater. It was not a fun time for England in 1599, however, and this is really important for the play. So this was a really tense time in the court of Queen Elizabeth. She's older now. She doesn't have an heir. We talked about her in the very first workshop, the time period. So people are getting really anxious. There's a lot of uncertainty about the fate of them and the world. Sounds a little bit familiar. The Spanish Armada was a huge threat, and Englishmen were being sent to war in Ireland. You could literally be picked up off the streets and taken to war, which was really a death sentence. And banishment was a common punishment at the time. And they couldn't return to criminals, couldn't return to the city again on fear of death. So this audience was very heightenedly aware of this topic of banishment, which is a huge sort of like background plot of this play. So we have in here now the Forest of Arden, or Ardennes, or Arden, as I said. And this is, I think, so genius, you guys. Okay, so he sets the play, Shakespeare. Oh, one more thing I wanted to say. So there were also, church and state were one at this time, right? And there was this bishop whose name I don't remember. We don't like him, it doesn't matter. But he, that summer, put a mandate out that he was banning all satirical books. You couldn't write a play or a book that was satirical. They didn't want you, they were like, basically like, we know when you're saying bad things about us and it's not satirical. We're not totally sure when it's satirical. So we're just gonna say, burn it all. So there's a line, and I couldn't find it in time for it today, but we'll look for it in the reading, but it stood out to me because it's basically, I think it's probably Touchstone. He gets a lot of the good lines in this play, commenting on, burn all knowledge, burn all the smart things. So Shakespeare was not supposed to be writing a satire. And yet, you guys, this whole play is really a satire, which is like amazing. Okay, so we've got he sneaks it in also by setting. So this play takes place in France. We know it's France. Not all the characters have French names. We're going to talk about some of their names later. But the genius part is this Forest of Arden. So Ardennes is a forest in France. He based the play, the title is like, there was a book called Rosalind, spelled with a Y, so no copyright infringement, that he sort of took the plot from, that takes place in Ardennes in France. But you guys, Shakespeare's mother's maiden name was Arden, and they had land, they had a forest outside of Stratford-upon-Avon. That was the Arden Forest. And it would have been dangerous roads to go from the court to that forest. So when Celia and Rosalind say, it's not safe for women to go there, to go to the Forest of Arden, the people of England would have known exactly what they were talking about. But by setting it in France, it's less obviously critical of England and the government and all of that. So I just find that to be really genius. Let's see. Oh, so this is what is called a pastoral play. And you'll hear this if you ever listen to literary criticism. Basically, pastoral settings were a common literary device at that time. It's sort of like how we think of Westerns today. It's sort of this idealized, anything goes, rules out the window kind of thing. Shepherds were sort of, if you've ever studied Marie Antoinette, and you know that if you visit her palace at Versailles, she had this quaint cottage with a stream, and it's this very pastoral setting. It was very romanticized, but at the same time, it was also, they're kind of seen as a bit dumber, simple. It was a simple life in these pastoral times. I guess they forgot about all the hard work and sheep shearing and stuff that they had to do. So again, the Elizabethan audience would have been very familiar with the idea of it being a pastoral play. There's shepherds in here. But again, I think it's a very sneaky and clever way that he's sort of putting all these things on. It's like smoke and mirrors, that they couldn't recognize, you know, that the bishop wasn't recognizing that this was all so much a criticism of what was happening. So I just sort of love that. And in the idea of the wilderness and the forest being this sort of place where rules, like everything goes topsy-turvy. So we saw this in Midsummer Night's Dream, which we read last week, the idea of like the fairy world. And by the end, when people from the real world enter the forest world, by the time they leave, everything should be restored back to normal again, but better, which is what we see in this play. So the Duke Senior has been exiled to the forest. By the time this play is over, he's been given his dukedom back, and now all the couples are happy and they go back to the real world, changed but better. It's also interesting. So this play, it actually has a lot of doubling for the reading tomorrow for people that are participating. Some people are doubling, some people are not. But the cast list, it would be like, I don't know, it's like 30 people or something. But you start to realize what Shakespeare was doing, that there's a ton of times where you never see the city people and the forest people together. So the dukes, for example, are often doubled. I didn't mention this because we didn't have a separate workshop for Midsummer, but often Oberon and Titania are doubled with Theseus and Hippolyta. They're often the same because Shakespeare was making the point of it being these are sort of two sides of the coin, two personalities, our sort of like underside and our, you know, our overside. That's not the right term. You'll often hear, just as a side note, you'll hear the term green world sometimes. That's what, again, the sort of like forest world is. There's a lot of literature and scholarship on what that meant. I don't think it's that important just to know if you hear, because again, I'm just trying to like empower everyone to, if you end up doing any further study and you'll read about Shakespeare's green world, this is what he's talking about. Now there's the blue world too, which is the ocean world. So, you know, any of those references. So that's a big overview of why this play at this time and why I think that this play. So I mentioned at the top that I didn't love this play before. And I think that it's because I saw a production of it, actually with some people from our class. And we all went, I remember us all going out for drinks afterwards and we were like, I didn't really get it. Like, okay, it was okay. Like, and I think that it's because it wasn't playing into this sort of satire. It didn't really, it might not have understood the values that Shakespeare was giving to it being a pastoral play, to these characters sort of, you know, being two sides of the same coin, all of that. And I just want to point that out because I think that I found that whatever my first sort of exposure is to one of Shakespeare's plays is how I feel about it until I learn more about it. So I mentioned in the very beginning, you know, I remembered reading The Tempest, didn't love it, and then went to go see it at the Globe Theater and was like, this is the best thing ever. So I think that it's really, I now think about that as being like, it's a responsibility if I were to do a Shakespeare play, if I were to ever direct a Shakespeare play, just even doing these workshops of like how recognizing that how we're first exposed to one of his plays, I think can often fuel how we feel about it. Because like I talked about before, he does leave his plays open to interpretation on purpose partly, but also there's just some things that we don't know. So does that all make sense in terms of sort of like the tone and knowing that there's all of these other like layers that we can find within the play so that it's not like, you know, just like a frothy comedy? Okay, awesome. I'm seeing yeses in the comments. One of the things that I always think that we should do is look at names. We're not going to go through all of the names of the characters, but Shakespeare is no fool in the names that he chose. So I just wanted to point out a few of the things in here. So Jacques, Jacques is like one of the only French names in this play. It means toilet. So yes, I love Lindy. I love that you're so reactive to everything. I love it. It makes me feel like I'm not in a vacuum. Yes, so Jacques meaning toilet. So Jacques is, you know, he's often known as being very melancholy, of course. All the World's the Stage speech, one of my favorite things about it is it's sort of like the Inigo Montoya, I do not think it means what you think it means kind of thing, in terms of it's always quoted as this like very, you know, inspirational, uplifting line, but Jacques is delivering it, and every line, every point he makes, he kind of shits on it, to use the like toilet reference. So he's super fun character to play. But just even knowing that Shakespeare chose to give him that name kind of lets us know what Shakespeare even thinks about some of the things that that Jacques is saying and doing. We've got Rosalind chooses to be called Ganymede, which I always thought was such a weird name. And she even refers to Jove, like why she chooses the name. But just to clarify it, that Jove or Ganymede was a common term for a young man who was in love with an older male lover in Elizabethan England. And in classical mythology, Jove, who's also Jupiter, who's also Zeus, kidnapped a cute boy named Ganymede and turned him into his official cupbearer. So we're not going to get into the possible homoerotic themes of the play. It's talked about more in this play, I think, than maybe any of Shakespeare's other plays. I think there's definitely an argument for it. I think there's an argument that that's not totally what he meant. I don't know. It's pretty strong because when you think about that, Rosalind would have been played by a boy, who's playing a girl who's pretending to be a boy, who's helping, Orlando woo her. The scene between them, and we'll look at it closer. But she's not speaking in verse at that point. She's still speaking in prose. And we talked about verse and prose before, and we're going to talk about it again. But it's just all very interesting what Shakespeare's doing in this play with that. And then you also have Celia and Rosalind, the way they describe their relationship. But again, we know that things, they talk about sharing a bed and things like that, but that's what girls did back then. That's not unusual. It just seems more in this play. So I certainly don't claim to know, what he was saying with that, but you might notice when you see productions or do productions that is leaned into heavier or not. So I just wanted to point that out there. I would definitely recommend, if you're playing a role in the reading tomorrow or multiple roles, looking up what their names mean, because almost always they mean something, but I just wanted to start with those two. Some themes to keep in mind: time. Time is huge in this play. It's referenced 50 times. It could be the word hour, not necessarily exactly the word time. And there's a whole thing about time being different in the forest. Time, and that's sort of that is part of what he's saying, is that, again, everything is different in this world where the hierarchy isn't so important. And no clocks in the forest. Yeah, that's the line, right? There's something about no clocks in the forest. Yeah. So it's a good theme to kind of keep in mind, keep an ear out for. Lots of references to animals. There's more references to animals in this play than any other of any other of Shakespeare's plays. Of course, the topic of exile, the topic of foolishness. So one of the things that makes this play so fabulous, it's just the characters of Touchstone and Jacques and even Corin and even Silvius. Like, there's a lot of fools in this play. So I wanted to show, let me try this slide thing again. So fancy, guys. Of fools. I titled it Fools Rush In because, again, just so clever. Share screen. All right. So in this is Jacques' first lines, I believe, or among the first, right after he has seen Touchstone. So Touchstone would be a very recognizable, typical fool in the Elizabethan period. And I'm going to talk about the different kinds of fools after this slide. But Jacques wants to be that. He's so enamored by Touchstone, and his first lines are, a fool, I met a fool in the forest, a motley fool, a miserable world, because he always has to add misery. As I do live by food, I met a fool who laid him down and basked him in the sun and railed on Lady Fortune in good set terms, and yet a motley fool. So what on earth is he talking about? So is he being played by Kate Dahl? So if you missed 12th Night last week, I'm so sorry, because Kate was amazing and she played the fool, and she basically just had a doll as a fool, and she would put it up whenever she was talking. And it's actually genius because, one, it was just very entertaining, obviously. But it's important to know in Elizabethan England, there were two types of fools. There were what were called natural fools and artificial fools. And I actually want to go back and research. I don't know that we know when an actor would have been a natural fool, because basically like they didn't understand like mental illness and things like that in Elizabethan England, or people with disabilities. But oftentimes those were described as being natural, meaning they were born foolish. Artificial fools were deliberately foolish and eccentric, and much like, we think of comedians today, that's who Touchstone would be very much an artificial fool. Motley, so you hear the word motley in this a lot. Motley is a costume. It's the kind of costume that the fools would wear. Often they had donkey's ears attached. So again, think about Midsummer Night's Dream, maybe why Bottom becomes a donkey. And it would be instantly recognizable to the audience. And he also carries a ninny stick, which is, I should have found a photo, but it's a drawing. It's a rod with a carved imitation of the fool's own face at the end. So the fact that, I don't know if Kate knew this, I want to ask her, I don't know if she knew that that's what she was doing by having a little doll, but it's actually perfect. And I had recommended the production of As You Like It on Globe TV. I'll send the link again if you don't have it. They do a really great production of As You Like It, in my opinion. It's a very straightforward production. I think it's very clear. And the guy that plays Touchstone has one, and not only that, but when he kind of changes costume, he does this really, pulls out a different one. It gets a big laugh. It's very, very funny. Sophia wrote, "Oh my God, that's why they say Ninny's tomb in Midsummer." I mean, we could be reading these, I swear, until, we're Adam's age, Adam being the servant who's in his 80s, and we would still not know everything. Touchstone is another word for standard or criterion. Maybe he's the one telling things as they really are. I think that's absolutely possible. And I think it's interesting that that Shakespeare chose to put two such brilliant characters in one play. I'd kind of be like, I'm going to spread these guys out. But by putting them both in one, it is really interesting. And I actually want to bring up that there's this brilliant scene. I mean, they're all, whatever. Okay, Touchstone. I go on tangents. So I mentioned that this play was written in 1599. This was the acting company, the Chamberlain's Men. And it was often the same actors would play the same kind of roles. They'd become famous for these roles. So there was an actor named Will Kemp in the company, and he was the sort of like resident clown, the resident fool. And his style was very improvisational. So a lot of the times his scenes were separate from the main storyline. He was a dancer. He was, played the sort of buffoon. At some point in this year, we don't know when, he leaves the company, we don't know why, artistic differences, and he's replaced by a guy named Robert Armin. And the main thing to know is that Robert's style was almost opposite. So he very much liked to follow the script. He was a singer. He was witty and smart. So we don't know which one of them plays Touchstone, most likely at this time. We don't know who. But I think it'd be interesting to look to see which one you think it was, knowing those two things. And even more clever is that there's a scene with Touchstone and this little character, William, who was for sure doubled because he's like nowhere else. William plays the boyfriend to Audrey, Phoebe. Which one ends up with Touchstone? Audrey does. Yes. And so, but William is really dumb. And so Touchstone, when William enters the scene, Touchstone is like, talks him out of being with Audrey, and is like, get away so that he can be with Audrey. But what's brilliant is William, we think, was played by William Shakespeare. So now you've got this scene with Touchstone, who would have been played by, one of the two guys would have been super famous. The other guy would have been William Shakespeare, obviously super famous. And I put this little scene in here as well. Oops, that's As You Like It. William meet William. Okay, share screen. Okay, so in this scene, Touchstone says, "Good evening, gentle friend. Cover thy head, nay, pray thee be covered. How old are you, friend?" And William says, 5 and 20, sir. I wanted to look back and see how old William Shakespeare would have been here. Touchstone says, "A ripe age. Is thy name William?" William says, William, sir. Touchstone, good evening, gentle friend. Cover thy, oh wait, I copied and pasted. Whoops, that's not the right line. Hold on, I'll look in my notes. It's already funny though, that knowing that it's William, right? That it's him introducing himself. I think, let me see, I wanna see if I have it somewhere handy. If not, I will find it again. Oh no, because I copied and pasted from the thing. Anyways, it's a really funny thing. Oh, because basically Touchstone says something like, you know, are you clever? And he's like, a little bit, you know. So it's very much a, again, hilarious satire the more we get to know. Let's see. In my head, Touchstone is Celia's gay BFF. He's actually played that with kind of a lot because he's like so over the top in that production that I mentioned, that video. He's hilarious. He does though end up marrying Audrey. And I mean, she's funny. I love, there's so many great roles in this. But see how even just like knowing those details, I feel like adds so much to these plays. Okay, let's see. I want to talk a bit more now specifically about the script, kind of how we've been doing before. We've been breaking down different elements of it, whether it's talking about rhetorical devices or iambic pentameter, et cetera, et cetera. So something that's interesting about this play, and I had pointed out that in 12th Night, I was shocked by when I went and reread it, that there was more prose than verse, and it's only one of 4 plays that is like that. This play has a lot of verse because all the forest people speak in verse. Orlando speaks in verse mostly. Rosalind rarely speaks in verse. She pretty much only speaks in verse when she's at the court in the beginning. And what's also interesting about this is this is the most lines of female, because again, it would have been played by a male, but the most lines assigned to a female role in all of Shakespeare's plays. It's still about half the amount of lines that Hamlet gets, but you know, it's a step up from any of the other roles. And it's the only Shakespeare play that ends with a woman speaking. So, and it's not just that it actually ends with like her having a last line, she has a full epilogue, which is actually quite fun. So more than Queen Margaret. She's got a lot. So, I mean, I didn't go back and double count. That's what the experts say. We can go back and double check. But once I started rereading it again, and it makes sense in a lot of ways that because she speaks in prose, she can get more words in almost. But I wanted to show you an example of iambic pentameter and how it matters here. So we talked before about, you know, an inverse iambic pentameter normally has 10 syllables per line, right? When it's 11 syllables or the very rarely done Alexandrian line is 12 syllables, it means something's up. And usually with 11 syllables, it means the character is trying to like process, think through something. And that's called a feminine ending, whatever. But I wanted to show you an example of, this is in the beginning when Duke Frederick, the bad guy Duke, Celia's dad, is banishing Rosalind, and Rosalind is trying to beg him not to banish her. Again, let me see, share screen. Okay. So we've got feminine endings, oops. Okay. Duke Frederick says, "Let it suffice thee that I trust thee not." Rosalind replies, "Yet your mistrust cannot make me a traitor." So you can see right below that I have how it would be said in iambic pentameter with unstressed, stress, unstressed, stress. So his line is a normal iambic pentameter, and he says, let it suffice thee that I trust thee not." She responds, "Yet your mistrust cannot make me a traitor." So she's processing. And you also know, because remember we talked about the words like yet. So he starts that line with yet. He's saying, you know, it should be good enough for you that I'm banishing you because I don't trust you. And she's like, but yet your mistrust can't make me a traitor. You know, it's like that's an illogical statement that he just made. So she's trying to like, be like, what are you talking about? That doesn't make any sense. Does that make sense? So that's just I just want to point out some of the things that we've been looking at in the previous workshops. Shared split lines. Some people had asked about this before. Again, this is again related to iambic pentameter. So this is again, Duke Frederick. Within these 10 days, if that thou beest found so near our public court as 20 miles, thou diest for it. And then she comes in and says, I do beseech your grace, let me the knowledge of my fault bear with me. So they scan as, within these 10 days, if thou beest found so near our public court as 20 miles, thou diest for it. And she would jump in, because his thou diest for it is only 5 syllables. And she's jumping in with, I do beseech thee your grace. You know, it's not now a tete-a-tete. It's not him saying, here's the deal. And she's like, but. It's like him saying, you come within 20 miles, you're dead. And she's like, this is sort of her last straw. Does that make sense? And then she gives another feminine ending. Let me the knowledge of my fault bear with me. Bear with me. Let me the knowledge of my fault bear with me. So she's jumping in. She's trying to think on her feet as she goes, is what Shakespeare is saying here. Again, these are just small details, but might be helpful. And then I wanted to show one more example of missing feet, missing syllables, missing words, and what it could mean. So I mentioned before the scene where Oliver has been attacked by a lion. We don't see it happen, sadly. It's off stage. And, his brother Orlando rescues him, and now Orlando's been injured and has told him, to go find Celia and Rosalind and let them know, or Celia and Ganymede let them know. So this is Oliver and talking with them, and Celia says, but at this hour, the house doth keep itself, there's none within. And Oliver says to Rosalind, if that I may profit by a tongue, then should I know you by description. Now, again, Rosalind is supposed to be in disguise here. So if you look at the way it scans, but at this hour, the house doth keep itself, there's none within. ... If that and I may profit by a tongue, then should I know you by description. So why does that matter? If the actor doesn't know that, because it's not clearly articulated in there, we will miss this entire funny thing that Oliver recognizes Rosalind. Because what happens is she passes out. She starts to pass out when he shows the blood of the lion, and she's thinking about poor Orlando. And so then when in the next scene you see Rosalind as Ganymede talking to Orlando, and Orlando's like, yeah, I heard you saw my brother or something. She's like, well, I'm a manly man. I don't normally pass out kind of thing. So it's understanding all of those kind of intricacies that again are not stage directions in there. Even that it says to Rosalind, this is a Folger version. This is a more this is an adaptation version to really let the actor even know that Oliver is talking to her at that point, but that's not in the original text. So depending on what script you're working with, it might be in there, it might not be in there. Does that make sense? Yeah. I believe you will. I guess it makes sense. Queen M's line stretch 4 plays. Rosalind picks hers into 1. Okay, fair. I mean, in 1 play, not being in all 4 plays. Are spaces considered thinking? So they can be considered thinking. They can also be stage directions, even though it doesn't say what they're doing. So it could be a kiss, it could be a fight scene, it could be an exit or an entrance. We just know that it means something. So yeah, is that helpful? So it helps us to know when there's an action to take, when there are beats to spare. Yes, yes, yes. Oh, you guys are so smart. I love it. Okay. So those were, again, I just wanted to to just keep touching back to kind of the things that we're learning as we go. Really helpful. Great. Get counting. Holy shit. I know. And you guys, for the readings, for example, I have never worked on Rosalind before. By tomorrow, I'm probably not going to have worked out all of her. I mean, she speaks in prose, lucky me, but normally, where this matters is if you're going to do the production and you're going to audition, if you're going to be doing monologue, a soliloquy, a scene in class, definitely do it for that. Yeah, so helpful when working on a Shakespeare monologue. I think I'm going to make a an audition cheat sheet list or something that goes in order of like, here's what I recommend doing, take it or leave it. You know, the first thing that I do is I look at this, and then I look at the iambic pentameter, and then I look at the punctuation, and then I look for, you know, so it's literally a checklist that we have based on the 6 Ps that I taught in the initial 2 workshops, but just something that it's like super, super clear and easy to follow and to remember. Yeah, verbs, adjectives. There's so much, you guys. I mean, just even we spent the first 20 minutes talking about the context of the play, you know, because you're not going to find that in most, you know, in like Schmoop or whatever, you know, a lot of the times, again, I've said this over and over, they're great, No Fear Shakespeare. They're great for like a literal translation of what the character is saying, so you can kind of follow along and have an idea. But I think this helps explain so much why when we see Shakespeare, sometimes we really get it, sometimes we don't. Sometimes I think it's especially important when we're seeing sort of adaptations, when it's put in a different setting. Okay, you don't have to do As You Like It in a French forest, that's fine. But if we're going to send it, you know, put it in New York City, then we've got to be very clear as to what that forest would be versus New York City, and what those 2 worlds would live like and those values. I wish there was a matrix with every page of verse mapped out. I agree. I was actually really shocked that there isn't something more, I don't know, actor friendly, user friendly. And like I said, I didn't even really realize it until putting these workshops together and, you know, having to do it based on a link and not on textbook, because like I'm the same. I don't have any of my books with me where I am right now. So I don't have like the Folger edition, you know, whatever. So, but even by having, I mean, the folio edition, so by having the Folger edition online and even looking on that and being like, oh, okay, this is a nightmare. So, yeah, I agree. I also was thinking, I wish there was like a Shakespeare Trivia Pursuit. now there's all these like weird, crazy things about the plays that we can learn. So I was thinking it would be fun to have in each of these workshops sort of like a new rhetorical device that we learn. So I'm calling it like rhetorical rejoice. I don't know. I'll work on it, guys. I am no touchstone, but I'm going to just show the screen because it's a weird word. So anastrophe. So anastrophe is a reversal of normal word order and is usually adjective and noun. If you think of Yoda, strong in the force you are, that's considered an anastrophe. That's used in Shakespeare. It's more, it's in, is it Anthony and Cleopatra? There's some really great examples. It's one to keep an eye out for. I thought of this one after kind of putting this together. So we can look tomorrow to see if we can find it in and As You Like It. But an example that I do have in As You Like It is epinorthesis, really easy little word. It comes from the Greek setting straight again. And if you think addition by correction, and this happens a lot in this play and specifically a lot by Touchstone. So this is that scene that I mentioned earlier where Touchstone meets William. Touchstone wants William to leave because Touchstone wants to be with Audrey, and William is Audrey's ex, or is at this time current boyfriend. So Touchstone here says, he, sir, that must marry this woman. Therefore, you clown, abandon, which is the vulgar, leave, the society, which is the boorish, which in the boorish is company, of this female, which in the common is woman, which together is abandon the society of this female or clown, thou perishest, or to the better understanding diest, or to wit, and he goes on and on, I'll stop. But this is a classic epinorthesis. So when he says abandon, then he's quantifying or qualifying what abandon means. He's adding to make it even a clearer point. This is meaning leave. The society, this female, which in the common is woman. I mean, that's ridiculous. It's hilarious. But he does it because to help highlight the point that Will is such an idiot. Like, he's got to really explain what is going on to Will. So you'll see this particularly in these sort of witty characters. Are they always signified by dashes? No. I actually don't even know in the first folio. This is from the Folger edition in the first folio. I'd be curious to see actually how it is written. And it's usually, interestingly, not done to help the audience, right? It's to help the character, what's going on between the characters. 2020 election, epinorthesis, please. There's so much about a lot of this that I'm like, yeah, I see why Shakespeare is so relevant. So those, let's see, I think those are the most of the technically things. Let me get back to my notes. Talked about fools, anastrophe, all the world's a stage. Okay. And then I guess like Monica, will you talk about the title of the play? Sure. So As You Like It is, like I said, the title and the plot comes largely from that other story, Rosalind, that I mentioned. We think that the actual title technically came from, and I want to get this right, it was from a Chaucer story, in which one of the characters says something about it. Let me see, Rosalind setting, oh yes. It's from The Wife of Bath's Tale. And one of the characters says, you can have your sovereignty and your mastery, for as you like it, it sufficeth me. So that's the technical where it came from. And then if we look at it in terms of, okay, what is Shakespeare saying? We know that this is a bit of a satire about what is going on multiple levels. Even if you look at the top of, Shakespeare is very interested in the fact that the firstborn sons got everything. And what that leads to. This is not the only play that he goes into this theme. And so each character, or each set of characters, I should even say, ends up sort of like representing a different take on how things should be, how the world should look. So what part of why this play is so fun to do is that you can really go to town, and I'm already picturing the costumes that are going to happen tomorrow for the reading. If you are, Phoebe, the goat herder, and who falls so in love with this woman dressed as a man and is being pursued by Sylvius, is a very simpleton shepherd, and their love, and they get together, versus you've got, Orlando and Rosalind, he's not a good poet, he's a bad poet, but they're both good people. In fact, Rosalind is kicked out because the Duke is, like I said, he thinks that people like her more than his daughter. Orlando is kicked out because his brother knows that people like Orlando more. So they have sort of this similar worldview. It's like each kind of coupling ends up as you like it, as it should be for them. It's not that's not the only way that we could take this play. But I also love the idea that I kind of think it's like, fuck you. I kind of think that's like the alternate title. Because
Can I speak on what you just said?
Yeah.
About it being fuck you, because that's what I was thinking this time when you were talking about the title, because if it's set in France, and in French, when you say to the effect of as you like it, it's comme tu veux, like kind of like whatever you want.
Yes.
Just whatever.
Yeah. I love that.
Interesting that at this time there was so many constraints put on how writers could write and what they were allowed to write about, and you're not allowed to make comedies or satires, and it's like, yeah, it could be a clever way.
I love that. I didn't know the French aspect. I didn't know the French translation, but I love it. I love it because that was just sort of like what I was thinking of. Like, it's kind of, it's as you like it. You can tell me what I can and can't write, and I'm going to write exactly what you just told me not to write.
Yeah, that's what a writer would do.
It's like so good, so good. I think that it gives, one of the fun things that it does is it gives permission for, again, the artistic team, the actors, whatever, to really kind of like lean into like the different worlds of what's happening in the forest versus, the way things are at court. And I think that it also makes it really interesting for modern times. If we start to see more sort of like censorship, more controlling of women's rights, what we can't do, whatever, this play becomes an even better play to do, I think. in a way that could really resonate with people. And then it just has so many good speeches. I mean, all the world's a stage speech, even then would have been like a showstopper. It would have been that sort of moment where you're kind of like, I don't really know what's going on, what's happening, why are they in the woods, why is there a lion? And and then you hear the speech and it kind of brings everybody together. There is also a lot of music, like I said. I think I mentioned in this one, just like in Twelfth Night, he's sort of like, kind of dancing the line between like musical theater almost, which they didn't have back then. But I can see now why a lot of conservatory programs, even if you're not going for musical theater, have people sing a little bit. So because a lot of these characters have to, have to be able to sing, or it certainly adds a lot to the plot, to the story if they can. Totally. I feel like the ending too. Oh yes, I wanted to talk about the ending. Thank you. Totally. I feel like the ending too, and how everyone just weirdly settles, like how Phoebe is suddenly just cool with marrying Sylvius, and it's all relative and silly convention. Yes. There's a lot of this is like, again, being like some of these rules that you as society have come up with are just like stupid, but also he brings in the god Hymen at the end. So good. I initially had Jordan cast in this, and then I like re-looked at it because I just assumed Hymen was a woman, and he's this like muscular god. And I think it's Megan now. I think I assigned it to her as one of her things. No purpose. Serves no purpose in this story, except one, it gives time for a quick change for Rosalind, because she's in her Ganymede boy's costume and comes into the girl's costume. Yes, it was the god of Hymen, hence breaking of the Hymen. Lovely. Can't imagine why I thought it would have been a woman god. And it's often, again, this is sort of like up to the production. Sometimes sometimes it's cut. Sometimes it's the character that played William. Sometimes it's the character played Corn. Sometimes it's Celia. In the video that I showed, it's it's this gorgeous buff guy that comes out and is the god. But it's also a reference to Metamorphosis. Shakespeare was huge fan of Ovid's Metamorphosis. And this concept is also in Metamorphosis. And it's also, he puts it in one of his other plays, where I think it's like the god Diana kind of comes in at the end. So I often hear a joke of like, if you should do what can I think of that play? We should do them in like, in rep, because if you got to have people fly down, like say you're using, you're flying the god in, like you've already got it set up. So, whatever. But again, it's another, I mentioned that, I think I put that in the email, one of the things to talk about was the ending. So if you see this done in a way, again, where they don't understand maybe that it's a satire, the values of the different worlds, et cetera, by the time you get to the end, and it's like all these characters are on stage, this god Hymen enters, you're like, and this whole conflict about the dukes, it's like the bad duke, we find out, found religion. But notice it's not the bad duke coming in, because the actor that played the bad duke is also the good duke who's on stage, so he can't play both people. So it's the messenger coming in and being like, oh, by the way, the bad duke found religion and he's sorry, and like he gives the kingdom back to the good duke. Like it's all just like, what? And it all happens within like, a few minutes. And again, I think it actually is a great ending in context of the world of this play, because it's not supposed to be about this brilliant plot. So I hate to think that people would like cut it because it actually adds to the like ridiculousness of all of it. Wow, it's like another play on convention, subverting the convention of, yes, Zoe Machina, yes, brilliant, yes. I mean, Shakespeare, so good. I think my favorite moment was learning that Will was William. It just made me pee my pants a little bit. Not really, that's weird. I don't know why I said that. Let's edit that out later. Since we have about 6 minutes left, I know that I talk at warp speed through these because there is so much information. Do we have questions? Or I know we have a lot of you, I just want to say, appreciate you being here, that I know that you do have a Shakespeare background. I know that this is not like, there's people of all levels in here. Somebody kind of rudely said to me the other day, like, well, all actors should know Shakespeare. Like, why would you need to teach the class? And I was like, even actors who know Shakespeare will be studying Shakespeare for the rest of our life. There's so many layers. I'm sure there's 5 million layers I have not uncovered in this. So anyways, you guys get gold stars. Good question. So somebody did not ask, why did Amanda want to throw this in the mix? Amanda, do you want to answer?
Yeah, hi. I saw this play as a kid and like in a park, and just like fell in love with it and like understood it. So, and then as an adult revisited it, and I love the role of Phoebe. I have looked at Rosalind before because I was like assigned like a passage from Rosalind in high school, and in reading it fell in love with Phoebe, and I've always wanted to play Phoebe, and there's just not like a good like scene for Phoebe, otherwise I would have brought it to class. Like there's not, I mean, her and Sylvia's have like a really short thing, there's a monologue, but I wanted to work on it in Tony's class and like in the way of the work. So I was like, oh my God, this is a perfect opportunity for me to play Phoebe and to get this, because this can be such a fun play. I mean, it's just like fun. It's just fun. So with like the
I'm
love.
so glad that you did.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
so much.
oh, go ahead.
And with your starting to work on the Saturdays for the Saturday, like learning more about it, it like re-sparked it for me because there's so much fun wordplay in this play. So I was like, oh, we're learning about fun wordplay. Like this is the perfect play because it's not as plot heavy as it is like fun wordplay. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
No, I love that. And keep in mind, next week's Othello. So I'm glad we have, we have a little happy one maybe before we get to that. Can't wait to, spend 20 hours on Othello this week. No, I mean, it's great. It's just gonna be very depressing. Do we have other questions? Other things that you would like to know, are there for this play or for these Shakespeare Saturdays in general? What's helpful, what's not helpful? The Duke stuff in this is pretty, oh, sorry.
Can you make your notes available to us after this, please?
Yeah, right now they're written in not a way that like, I can make the slides, those I can share. My personal notes are like chicken scratch. But yeah, I can definitely share those. I would like to get, a little bit more advanced with them as I go. I literally was this morning thinking, oh, you need to be able to visually see some of these things. And so I thought I would try doing the, adding in a few slides. If that's helpful, I can definitely get better with that. I can share the links at the bottom of the Google Doc. Thank you. The screen share really helps. Okay, great. Really good to know. Love the slides. Great. I want to make them prettier. Really bothers me. I'll work on it. Let's see, what else? We've got a few more minutes. Any questions on As You Like It or other plays, or how you would love to see Shakespeare Saturdays continue, evolve, change?
I have one question. Why are there only 4 plays that are written more like this?
Are there any other plays that are written like this?
Well, you said that there are 4 plays that there is more prose than verse.
Oh yeah, that was in reference to this. This is not one of them actually. It's Twelfth Night was one of. There's only 4 plays that have more prose than verse in them. Twelfth Night was one of them. This play isn't one of the 4, I don't think. It's just that Rosalind, interestingly and weirdly, speaks almost all in prose. And I've tried to find like a definitive answer as to why and what that can mean. And we're not totally sure, except that it is interesting to note, because usually, even when she's in love, it doesn't change, which is usually like, the deciding factor. But it is interesting that when she's in court and she has to sort of put on the sort of courtly manner, she does speak in verse. But once she leaves that, she really doesn't go back to it. There's a lot of interesting from a sort of like feminism perspective that are actually quite interesting about Rosalind. I just think, again, that she gets that whole epilogue in the end. She also, we don't really know, she has, if you notice, she doesn't have, her father's been banished, her mother likely dead, not mentioned. She's got the other Duke who's an asshole to her. She doesn't have a lot of great male role models. And so when she gives this, when she's working with Orlando, she's interestingly very pessimistic about love and about, you know, how, and about like feelings and all of that. And I think it's an interesting thing to just sort of like play with and look at, of like, and why would she be? She doesn't have these like great examples, perhaps. She doesn't have a mom around. She doesn't have, you know, she's got Celia, who it can be a super fun character. Just an interesting from like a psychological perspective to look at. Are all these, so all the sessions are recorded. I'm not totally sure what I want to do, how comfortable I feel with like what to share publicly and not. Part of it's just that I'm like creating these as I go. Part of these is for, you know, you guys. I want to make sure everyone feels comfortable. I do feel like with these, it's not as much like people, you know, vulnerably sharing, you know, work or something, that maybe it would be more comfortable than, you know, Tony's class or something where we wouldn't want to share monologues.
Can I, it's 2:00, so I need to jump to the other meeting, but do you want to jump to the other meeting too, in case there's more questions?
No, I will keep the links separate. If you have any other questions, just let me know, send me an email. I think I know all of you guys, and I'll keep you posted. You'll be the first to know about how to proceed. And yeah, would love to have, if you have friends join. If you have anything to donate to the Venmo fund, that's great. If not, totally get it, zero worries. And I will see you at the reading tomorrow.
All right, thanks, Monica.
Bye, guys.